fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood ones, the holly suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet, eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. The universe and everything in it is more likely electric and governed by the rules and properties of such than any other theory out there. Who knows why we have been led to ignore the evidence and been directed instead down a path of strange special relativities and mechanics, but our guest tonight is a genius in the field of electrical manipulation and theory, and he has deigned to speak with me on Rogue Ways about all of the hidden and suppressed aspects of his life and work. The sage on the outskirts, the creator of EPD Laboratories, the author of Versor Algebra, and the genius himself, Eric Dollard. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Well, I start with sort of a pointless question of the episode usually, and today is kind of a weird day to be talking because it's not only Easter Sunday in the Christian world, but we're also in the middle of a worldwide sort of outbreak and lockdown of something. So what is your take on this sort of moment in time?
Well, that's kind of a complicated question.
Yeah, there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's something surprising going on.
True, unfortunately.
There's a rather nasty planetary alignment that we just passed through that didn't help anything.
What was that? Was that the Saturn and...
It involved Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and possibly Pluto. It's difficult to determine these things anymore because that information is basically suppressed. Weather information, astronomical information, solar information, all of these things have become rather difficult to come about anymore.
Right.
So I can't speak with the accuracy that I used to, and oddly enough, it's kind of odd that an electrical engineer like myself has to turn to astrologers to at least halfway figure out what's going on, because the astronomers have decided to do a lockdown on the heliocentric planetary information.
Huh.
Which was a subject of a 4-year study I did at Sonoma State College from 1978 to 1982 with equipment that was provided by the Radio Corporation of America to basically reestablish the RCA radio astrology theory once over again. And I learned quite a bit, and a lot of material was available at that time. I used to get a booklet came out every year called the Astronomical Almanac that was provided by the U.S. Navy, and that gave all the graphs of when the planets were going to cross and how far off they would be angular-wise and the times and the whole thing, which really was quite helpful. And then all of a sudden one day I was told that's no longer available.
Weird.
And I also used to get a little stapled together paper from the Space Environmental Services Center in Colorado that would give the diagrams of where the sunspots were and little graphs of electron density and all these kind of things. And then all of a sudden I was told that that's no longer available. And I keep hearing this again and again, no longer available, no longer available. And then a service which I rely upon for my own safety when I'm living outdoors, particularly in the desert, where you can get very wicked weather that's lethal. It was announced on the radio station WWV that I've been getting that material for decades, and it's no longer available.
Huh.
And same thing with the solar terrestrial information. Used to get off the WWV, used to tell me what solar activity was, the magnitude of the flares, the times they occurred, and what happened. And all of a sudden, we were told that that would no longer be available. There was an outcry, and so they made it available, but they had a haircut for an announcer, so you couldn't understand anything that was being said, and basically no real information was provided anymore. So that's the lockdown that I'm going through.
Wow, that's fascinating. can I actually have you hold on for 1 second? I'm so sorry. Sorry, let's continue. So that information is locked down. Do you have any idea why they are trying to control that and not let it out?
Well, the same reason that they're putting out all this fraudulent information about this recent disease wave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is they want the livestock herded into the chute of their big lie.
Yeah. And the more information we have,
their relativity and their evolution and their global warming and all the poor abused and all of that is that's the dominant material that's out there today. And anything that's factual is to be suppressed and eventually touted as a hate crime or racist. I heard on a radio show recently that now mathematics itself is racist.
What?
So how does that affect me as a mathematician?
Yeah. How do they figure this? What's their line of, I guess, unreasoning? So it's not very logical.
Well, I don't want to keep going on this subject. I'd rather, stick to some more technical stuff or what have you, because it'll get quite ugly.
Yeah. Well,
and it'll just end up getting banned.
It is true.
Basically, I had a little parable I kind of came up with. It's kind of crude, but it's based on the Wizard of Oz. So we have the Wicked Witch of the East. Mm-hmm. In this case, metaphorically speaking, the Wicked Witch of the East was ready to hand the United States on a silver platter to China.
Yeah.
But something happened. Dorothy's house crash landed on her and killed her. So that's Trump. The Wicked Witch of the East is Hillary.
Yes.
So who shows up but the Wicked Witch of the West in a blind rage? I think we can call that maybe Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
So first, we have the Russia hoax.
Yes. Which people are still
Millions
claiming.
and millions of kilowatt hours were poured into the Russia hoax. Every single bit of data was dedicated to the Russia hoax. Didn't work.
Thank God.
Then we had the Ukraine hoax. Billions and billions of kilowatt hours were expended in transmitting and promulgating the Ukraine hoax. It didn't work. Mm-hmm. Everybody looked at each other and asked, what are the Democrats going to do next? The Corona hoax.
Yeah. And it's really ripping everything apart. I mean, it seems though
that's what it's intended to do.
Absolutely.
We are at war with China.
Yes.
China has infected our communication system with surveillance and disruption and censorship. They have invaded our technological infrastructure with Trojan horses that are in every single device that you plug into a wall socket that are designed to jam all radio reception so that you are dependent on the internet.
Wow.
These things are being installed on light poles around towns and LED lights to wipe out all of the citizen band radios so the truckers can't communicate.
Oh, that's what those
These
are.
little devices that you buy, that you plug into the wall in your house,
okay,
all AM radio reception, so that now you have to rely on the internet for your information.
Which they can control so easily.
The whole electrical utility grid is being rewired inside out to become a giant antenna for all of this interference.
Wow.
And not only as a transmitting antenna for interference, but a receiving antenna for the nuclear EMP with special wiring to bring the impulse into your house.
Wow.
We are at war.
And
nobody is firing back.
Do you think that, because I've seen these little devices go up around town very recently in my city that look almost like the miniature sort of 5G plates. I don't even know what to call these things, but they're kind of they're like maybe 1.5 feet long or so by, 6 inches wide or something, and they seem to be appearing on light poles around the city. And I don't know if that's part of what you're describing, but I imagine it is. And I wonder if you remember when there was the fires in Northern California, there was a lot of helicopters with strange, some sort of surveillance device on their noses, and they were flying around that area where the fire had been. And do you think that has any connection with this sort of war that we're not seeing?
It's hard to say. There's so much going on.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I take it from the standpoint of what is it that interferes with my ability to operate.
Yeah.
I tend to look at things practically, and because of my training and the facilities that I have available to me, or the ones that I did have available to me, I've determined that these are factual things that I just said, and they're very disruptive to my own experiments and measurements and what have you. I have to drive 5 or 10 miles out of town just to be able to listen to distant AM radio stations, or use my HF ham radio, or talk to the truckers with the CB.
Wow. And I know there's
most people I know now that are hams that use high frequency radio to communicate are telling me that the Chinese Trojan horses that people have screwed into their light sockets and plugged into their wall sockets have basically shut HF radio down. And here these people, have been doing this for like 3 generations and have thousands of dollars of equipment, and the stuff has all been rendered useless.
I've been hearing that lately, and it's such a tragedy. These are the technologies that we can keep going in almost any situation, and they're being dismantled for really no reason. And California came out and said openly that they were going to dismantle the ham radio network, and it was very strange why you would do that. They don't even really give a reason. They just say they're going to do it. And it's I know I've known people who, like you say, have put years and thousands of dollars into this ability to communicate, and I just can't understand why you would ever remove that, unless, like you're saying, that there's a war going on that we're not necessarily privy to. But I wonder what you think about the growing love for China in the media. Speaking of China, that it just seems like China owns the media, perhaps because they're unwilling to criticize China. And even Bloomberg came out and said, that China's not totalitarian and that their dictator is not a dictator. And it's so strange to watch supposedly liberal people apologize for China. The worst of the human rights violations we know of come from China. And it seems insane, but the whole media seems caught up in that narrative.
Well, the media is basically owned by China. China has taken this country over.
It's terrifying.
It was a methodical process that began in the late 60s into the early 70s. Being a native San Franciscan, I'm quite acutely aware of the process and how destructive it was, because I was at the receiving end of it.
Wow.
And basically, with the Wicked Witch of the East becoming president, that would have finalized it. But Dorothy crash landed and killed her.
Go, Dorothy,
and now everything is up in arms. Everything is up in arms. It's a disaster control effort. You have these big tech people, which are probably some of the creepiest people that have ever existed on the earth. I mean, it's
Truly.
Adolf Hitler and his crowd
Yes.
look like basically little schoolgirls compared to the evil of these tech giants, particularly this Bill Gates. Bill Gates is probably one of the most malevolent, evil people ever to crawl the face of the earth. That's why he has severe protection. You couldn't even get near that guy.
Agreed.
He's behind the whole thing. And they're all butt buddies with China. I saw it back in the 70s when the Jewish New York carpetbaggers came from New York City and invaded San Francisco and the area around it, took everything away from us, and said it was too nice for us and that we didn't have the right politics. And then they were making yearly trips to China, Feinstein and all of those people, to collaborate with Mao Zedong.
Wow.
And finally, their fruits, they're here. China owns this country.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to learn how China has taken over ownership of much of our infrastructure, which I don't understand. If you pretend to want to protect a country, why you would sell your infrastructure to a foreign nation. And then, like you were talking about, the electronic control they have is just pretty frightening. It's interesting that not more people find China to be a terrifying enemy on the horizon, or not even on the horizon, in our front yard, in our house, you know?
Yeah, it's literally in your house.
Yeah.
So when you make a telephone call, if in my case, being someone that had heavy bell system experiences and a transmission engineer and all that, there are certain standards that were adopted for, like the rate at which the ring signal goes on and off, and the busy signal, and all those kind of things, the tones used in the dial tone. Well, you start finding now when you make a call, that standard doesn't seem to exist anymore. And when you have that kind of sixth sense that you can feel the circuit that you're going through, a certain percentage of our phone calls now are being diverted through Chinese carriers, and then they monitor everything that's going on. Or if your conversation kind of goes in a way that they're not interested in, then you get cut off. And so they're inside. It's a disease. It's an infection. They're inside of us.
Yes.
And basically, the only defense against it at this point, which is too extreme for the addicted masses, is to smash your silly phone.
Yeah. And for many reasons.
Your smartphone or whatever, smash it. Get a hammer and smash it and learn how to live without it. That's the only way we can save this country.
I'm not in disagreement with you at all. I think there's so many reasons why those devices are horrifying. And like you said, we're addicted to them. And I think it would be best to get rid of them for sure.
Well, that's part of the process. That's what, the dealers in what we call SNITE, which is any kind of white powder drug that you sniff up your nose or you shoot into your veins, heroin being one,
Yeah.
cocaine, methamphetamines, and what have you, is the people that supply that, they start off by giving it to you real cheap. And once you're dependent on it, the price goes up. And that's the kind of the way it is with this communications thing. Well, now you want more bandwidth. You start becoming more impatient when people don't answer their phone. And it just keeps kind of getting a little tighter and a little tighter into you until eventually, well, now you can't pay your car insurance unless you do it online. You can't pay your registration. You can't do this. You got to do everything online. And then there's this malevolent element, this artificial malevolence that's built into the system, and the criminality that kind of is coupled with it, that all of a sudden you find out your bank account is empty, or you lost the title to your house, or, whatever.
Yeah.
So smash your device.
And we see this.
That ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. No, I don't think it is.
So people tell me, oh, the smart meters, and they're all running around like Chicken Little screaming, the smart meters, the sky's falling, the chemtrails are killing us, oh, I'm so... Well, how about the thing that you hold next to your head all day?
Yeah.
Or how about all the RF that you've pumped into your house with your Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
Is that any different?
No, it seems worse because it's in closer proximity, right?
So why are you bitching about the smart meter? And then, oh my God, the 5G, oh my God, the ringing of hands, the wailing and the carrying on. Oh, Chicken Little is just bouncing off of walls. The sky's falling. Well, you wanted more bandwidth, didn't you?
It is.
And then it won't be enough. You'll want more.
It is very interesting that someone pointed out the simplest way to end 5G is proliferation is to stop using anything related to that type of technology, and so then it'll kill the demand for it, and so there would be no money in it, and they would stop propagating it. And I was like, it's a fascinatingly simple method, but it's one that, like you said, is very unlikely for people to take up.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
And there's really nowhere in the world to go to get away from this stuff anymore.
No. Yeah, it's a sad thing. I heard not too long ago that people who are kind of into recording the sounds of nature without any sort of human created sounds mixing in, just pure natural sounds, and that's it, are finding increasingly fewer and fewer places on planet Earth where you can go and not hear sort of man-made sounds, and it's sort of the same phenomenon. We're sort of encroaching. All spaces will be covered in radiation of
Well,
sound.
I can vouch for that because I live out in the wilderness in my car. Presently, I'm not, but I've lived in my Toyota Corolla for 33 years.
Wow.
And I've taken that thing places people wouldn't take their four-wheel drives, get away from Babylon.
Wow.
And there's nowhere you can go anymore to see the stars at night. People, oh, I can see the stars. Well, yeah, you can see, what, maybe 20 or 30?
Yeah.
When I was a child and we used to go out to the RCA receiving station in Tennefield, about 40 miles north of San Francisco, that's all there was stars.
Yes.
Trillions and trillions. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't see your hand in front of you. You couldn't see the person next to you. You lived in what's called the firmament. That's gone.
Yes.
It's all gone.
I mean, it was thick. It was like
And
the whole sky.
my Earth signal listening, this turning inside out of the electrical power system to create harmonics and interference and what have you, there's, we've expended about $100,000 here in doing research, on antennas out that we build out in the desert and what have you. And we went through quite a bit of effort to put one together here in central Nevada. And then this NV Energy, one of these, Chinese-run oligarch outfits, started wiring all their transmission substations up wrong, and there's so much stray electricity running around in the ground, we can't receive anything anymore. It's as loud as a lightning strike.
Wow. And that's what's traveling through the actual Earth itself, like the ground.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
And then it's in
And
the
it
air.
actually is illegal, but there's no law anymore.
Huh. Wow. It's really sad.
And you can't do anything about it. You can't say anything. You can go to all the, the Public Utilities Commission and the rest of them. They'll just shine you on. And if we end up becoming too big of a problem for NV Energy, a.k.a. Warren Buffett, they just kill you. They can do anything they want.
They definitely kill a lot of people. Yeah. Well, sort of a switch in directions, but going back to the sort of coronavirus, allegedly, and what's going on with that. I recently heard that one of the symptoms that a lot of the people who are experiencing whatever maladies are affecting them, they're reporting that their body feels like it's buzzing and fizzing. And I've never heard of such a symptom before. What do you think about that? Does that...
Well, I can't, I'm starting to get out of my area there.
Okay.
Because I don't know all the data, and there's so much of it, it's just noise now.
Right, and who knows what's true. And
yeah,
what's just reported as...
But enough is coming to the surface that most of these so-called cases are forgeries. Just
right.
Before you called, I was watching some woman on one of these internet channels outraged that she went to the hospital with the symptoms of a cold, and no tests were done, and they immediately put down that she had the Wu flu.
Yeah.
That's what we call the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they need the numbers.
They need the numbers in order
then
to
we have
convince
all
us.
this bravado and and what have you going on in New York City with the big siren on top of the Empire State Building to keep the population in a constant state of tension and fear, flashing lights and the whole thing, and lines of hospital beds and fields and coffins for mass graves, and all that stuff was just a show. It's not one person ever appeared in any of these hospitals, and then all of a sudden the whole thing about these ventilators and all that stuff, well, actually, those things aren't necessarily what you want to use for a lot of lung disorders. They can make the situation worse.
Right.
And it turns out to be that most of the people that are on these ventilators with the Wu flu then die from it, which is good because then they can get more numbers.
Yeah.
So basically, this is our first 9/11 police fantasy was that World Trade Center.
Mm.
Now, anybody that has a brain bigger than a black walnut knows by looking at the pictures that couldn't physically, it's not physically possible
Yes.
without some kind of assistance for the buildings to fall down the way they did.
Exactly.
Particularly if you're an architect or an engineer. It's glaringly evident. But it was necessary to polarize the country into this new state of perma-war.
Yeah.
Well, now we have the 9/11 police fantasy squared. So now the police can run around and bully people, and basically everybody is under house arrest, except in areas like here in central Nevada, where the sheriff's office just says, no,
Yay.
we're not going to do that here.
Good for them. Yeah, there's a couple sheriffs around the country that have really made me proud lately, for resisting this sort of police state takeover and this unconstitutional overreach that the government is employing here. And I've always said, they're our biggest allies. There may be some police abuses here and there. I'm sure there is. There always is, no matter what group you're looking at. There's abuse and corruption, but there's always the possibility too that those are the people who step up and protect you in reality when things go terribly wrong. So I've been very happy to see that is happening, and I hope that we see more of that, because that's the type of action that we can hopefully start to turn things around here. But speaking of that,
well, that depends a lot on what the nature of the particular sheriff's office in a particular county is. Some of them, particularly San Bernardino County, and to another extent Riverside, and also I believe it's Nevada County. From my experiences of watching what goes on around me while I'm a feral human, these particular sheriff's offices are intrinsically evil. And those are the ones that are chomping the bit for this kind of stuff. They just want to go out and start killing people.
That's what is scary.
Now, I don't know what the ratio is between how many are like that,
Right.
how many are not. From my experiences, that's about 5 to 10%, because I occupy a lot of counties. I basically live in a 1,000-mile square. Each side's 1,000 miles.
That's awesome.
That's how I ended up putting 690,000 miles on my Toyota Corolla.
Wow.
So it's not a lot, but you have to look at things in stages. If the Democrats decide to keep amping this thing up and placate Bill Gates and his desire to inject us with his thing,
Ugh.
that's basically what the bottom line is here.
Right.
And let's say a particular sheriff's office says, well, we're not going to enforce that. The National Guard will come and disarm the sheriff's department.
Yes. And I hope that people in the National Guard also find a conscience and say, no, we're not going to participate in this. But, it's...
The National Guard is a really creepy batch of people.
Oh, God.
One of the reasons why I have to stop living in Lone Pine, which I basically had planned to spend the rest of my life, is because every day it is under attack by high-speed military aircraft from the Army National Guard. And they're out there harassing hikers, harassing campers, constantly buzzing the town, and every day, all day. And it's just unbearable.
Wow.
If you live outside, it's unbearable. These things circle over my car for an hour, practicing killing me.
Yeah. Ugh.
And I even managed to get radio confirmation of that, of one of the pilots saying how he couldn't wait for the day that they could open fire on us.
Wow. I know these people exist. I just still, when I encounter them, there's just part of my soul that does not understand how you can take joy in things like this, and for what purpose, and how disconnected, from yourself and the universe you have to be in that place. It's terrifying.
Well, one thing that really helps it is the ingestion of pork.
Interesting.
And the ingestion of pork will lead to the ingestion of human flesh.
Ew.
And there's already restaurants in L.A. serving human flesh.
What?
And they don't tell you where they're getting it from.
And they're calling
but
it
they're
pork?
proud to show their menu and how groovy and cool they are. So all of these so-called tech moguls are starting to turn into cannibals.
I mean, I assumed so based on some of the creepy, like, what seems like rituals that you sort of see them partaking in that are highly disturbing. But I've never heard that there's people serving actual human and calling it pork. I mean, and people are doing this knowingly eating it, knowing that.
Well, no, they're not. They're not calling it pork. It's definitely, it's advertised as human flesh.
What?
And but it's in discussing the subject, they point out that you can't tell the difference between it and pork.
Oh God. And
It's an archetype. There's a whole species of pig people.
Yeah.
Its exoskeleton is the Dodge Ram sucker. That's the kind of people. Pigs. It's like things here in Central Nevada don't tend to get hysterical, with all this, what do you call, hoarding and what have you. But there was an outbreak here. I didn't notice it right off. But one thing I did notice when I was in the store, everybody looked like a pig. Well, there's a lot of weird anthropology in Central Nevada. It shifts from week to week. I didn't think too much of it, other than I noticed it.
Yeah.
And I noticed that the shopping carts were fuller than normal. And then the next day, I noticed that all the butt wipe and all the paper towels were gone. Well, the pig people grabbed it all up. So we have this market here called Rayleigh's, which is like Envy Energy. Its dictates come from China. So Rayleigh's, which has really been harassing the town with moving things around, changing prices, all kinds of, Soviet-style posters and what have you, they decided that they're not going to restock the shelves to keep the tension high.
Yeah. I've seen this happening.
So when the Civil War breaks out towards the end of the year and the shooting begins after the election, Rayleigh's will probably turn off the food supply to this town.
Yeah.
I don't think people understand how serious this is.
I don't think so either. And I think people think right now it's really bad, and it's highly likely that this is just the beginning stages of something they're going to ramp up even more, like you're saying. And the Civil War, post-election has sort of been hinted and alluded to in various ways over the past at least 4 years, if not longer. But what makes you specifically think that timing and that goal is what they're aiming for?
Well, looking at the situation, if Trump wins, then the antique fascists are going to be, via George Soros, Bill Gates, and all the rest of them, the antique fascists will be unleashed upon society in the main population areas.
Yeah.
And it'll be an all-out war.
Highly funded, really angry.
If the Democrats manage to steal the election, which they're busy working on, that's part of the reason why we're going through this whole corona hoax.
Right. Agreed.
Then it'll be kind of where if Trump wins, it'll have kind of more of a shorter, higher time constant. The area under the curve is the same, whether you stretch it out or you let it peak. So nothing is gained one way or another.
Yeah.
But it'll all puke out in one big violent blast and probably dampen out in a reasonable period of time, and most of the dead will be those that deserve it. If the Democrats win, it's going to be a slow, drawn-out process. And this country will be owned by China, and we will live under Chinese dictates.
Which is the worst. This is part of why I can't
and
understand.
Bill Gates will be the Fuhrer.
Ugh, that guy.
That's where we're heading.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope. Either way, it's not looking too good, but I really hope that it doesn't go the way of the Democrats. I mean, they're their top guy right now is like an open child molester, and no one seems to care, and I don't understand that either. But it's like there's this mind control that has happened, and people are caught up in this spell, and they're cheering on pedophilia and China and like human rights violations and the destruction of their own rights, and they're just doing it mindlessly, and it's just so terrifying to watch this absolute lack of logic or rational thought at all, and just an overwhelming amount of emotion mixed in, which is like the worst combination you can have is no rationality, no logic, and high emotion. It's just really easily manipulated, I think, and I think that's the problem. And when you're talking about eating pork, and I think about the sort of parasites and things that can be in pork and other foods, but I wonder if that has some role to play, because I know that certain parasites or viruses can affect the way that we behave and the way that we think, and in conjunction especially, it might make certain technologies even more effective. But that's all speculation.
Oh, yeah, definitely. the food supply is highly adjusted to create the effect. But the real thing the real root of the entire problem is digital. Digital is the beast.
Yeah.
I've had to basically declare everything that I'm doing a dead horse.
Wow.
I cannot get any cooperation out of anybody. Nobody has the ability to communicate anymore. Some people have just withdrawn into their little digital hole, and I never hear from them again. And I can't get... Right now, I have an individual that says that he wants to find financing for the project that I'm endeavoring to get going now, which I call the musical seismograph.
I'm sorry,
it's a capitalistic project. It'll make money. It'll be something new.
Yeah.
There'll be the wind chimes for the inside of the Earth. It'll have a sensitivity that has never been achieved before in doing this. It seems like a great idea.
Yeah.
And then that helps with my earthquake forecasting and other things, which I'm basically not allowed to put out. But people can make a determination on their own if they get the data.
Yeah.
So we're looking at maybe $500,000 to get this thing started. So I have an organization, and I have members in the organization, and I have associates and what have you. I can't get anybody to lift a finger to go after this money. They don't care. They tell me that they don't have time for Eric.
Weird.
I have people that are doing scientific work to get some of these other methodologies out for seismic precursors and what have you. I can't get them to cooperate. They can't. There is no longer any ability for cooperation or communications amongst humans because of digital. It's over. Everyone is withdrawn into their little womb, their little digital womb, their little fantasy world, and they can't come out. And that's exactly what the plan is. Stay inside.
It really.
So we're getting this, vectorially, we're getting this from a lot of different directions with the same objective.
Yeah.
Stay inside where you belong.
Yes. Which is interesting because it makes me think of the sort of connection that we have, electronically and otherwise with the actual sort of earth and the soil, the actual earth itself, and also with the sun and maybe the moon as well. And these are things that we're like literally in connection with, transferring energy in some way, and to be disconnected from all of that inside of our houses is like, not only we're disconnected from that, but we're in this like electric box, electrified box that we're in. And who knows what else?
Yeah,
you're
living inside of a radio frequency furnace.
Yeah.
And no one knows what the moon is or the stars, and they're not interested.
No.
The work that I'm doing with the mathematics and engineering and what have you, not that that was my real plan. I like to build things and do stuff like that, but I can't. I have no support. I have no help. The materials are difficult to get. And what I am presently working on right now on my desk, if I put this out back in 1910, let's say, or 1890, I would have been world famous.
Wow.
Now, it barely pays the utility bills for my building.
Because it's not part of their plan, so no one's paying attention.
Nobody's interested. Nobody cares. And then you got all the disinformers and all that stuff, the blowhards and the conspiracy theorists and chicken little and all that, and it's really disgusting to watch how, I've advanced and taken the works of Heaviside and Steinmetz and a number of other people whose names are less known, and carried on their work and have finalized some of it to a level that is really enabled a much better understanding of electricity. All people do is smear their feces on it. And I just see on the internet, I see channel after channel of people smearing their crap all over the work that I've done and turning it into something that has no relationship, and just basically turning everything inside out and turning it to garbage. Yet everybody is eager to hear what they have to say.
Ugh. Well, it's really...
So what was the point? What was the point of me doing all this other than for my own entertainment? I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm learning things. I'm doing experiments. I can't experiment with resistors or capacitors anymore, but I can experiment, with plus and minus signs and ratios and what have you.
Yeah.
And discover things and carry on the work of the masters. But electricity is, with the advent of Einstein and all those people, electricity now is the enemy. It's hated. Einstein says there is no electricity.
That seems
So
ridiculous.
consequently, that's what we operate on. And that's part of the reason why the whole electrical utility system is unraveling. And it's not legal anymore. It's not safe. Produces massive quantities of interference. It's subject to disruption. It looks like shit. It won't last as long as the stuff that my ancestors built. 100 years. Some of the old lines that I work on out in the desert, the poles are 100 years old.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like it's been a swift degradation, of not just, because I'm not as obviously informed as you about the field of electricity and the sort of infrastructure of that, but it seems like in a lot of areas our quality of, I think it's everything has degraded, including our quality of thought and learning, especially, and intentionally so, by the people who want to steer us a certain direction, I think. And so it's really sad to see, and it's really sad to hear.
I had a good opportunity early on when this thing, which one of its fruiting bodies is something called Commonweal, which invaded Bolinas, actually killed some of my friends. And their mind state is really puzzling. They're basically psychopaths. It's almost, you can't say that this is all done with deliberation. It's some kind of psychosis. There's something really fundamentally wrong with these people between the ears.
Yes.
And that's why you're getting all this cannibalism and child molesting or God knows what else.
Right.
But that's what these people, when they came in, that was one of the first things they established through the state of California was stealing people's children.
Yeah.
And turning them over to the state. And getting them on drugs and getting them so that they were basically stuck in their position.
Yeah.
And that's just what I saw at the surface, because I don't live in the sub-gutters. We can't begin to imagine, because these kind of modalities are all repulsive to us. We don't even want to think about it.
Right. People don't even want to acknowledge it exists.
So consequently, in our universe, it's kind of like unbelievable. It's surreal. It's not imaginable that people are actually that deprived, but it is. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, and it
You're a
seems like,
politician, you're a pedophile.
right.
And then, you know, you're starting to drink people's blood and eat their flesh. And so I just watched an interesting movie yesterday called Animal Farm.
Animal Farm?
And yeah, it's called Animal Farm. Have you heard of that? It was written by George Orwell.
Yes, I've read the book and much of his work. I love him.
Yeah, the movie is really good. So it starts off with this decrepit pig that looks just like George Soros, and he's the one that lays out, or whatever,
Yeah.
is the one that lays out the plan, and then basically the whole process unfolds, forced socialism, and it's stage by stage evolution. And it was I read the book in high school, and then a friend of mine who has a photographic memory for this stuff we were talking about the ending when the pigs became the farmers and what have you, and then he had the author wrong. So I looked it up on the internet, and it wasn't H.G. Wells, it was Orson Welles. Or is it Orson Welles? No, it was, I don't know. I can never get these names straight. But at any rate, I watched it, and it was worthwhile to see, you know, the whole thing. And then another movie which I really recommend that everybody watch, even though it's not good to create more fear in people, but it shows the mentality. It's called The Crescenda Crossing.
Crescenda Crossing.
Yeah, it's on YouTube at no cost. I came across it by accident. I don't type stuff into YouTube. I just kind of pull the handle on the slot machine and see what numbers pop up.
Yeah.
And let it kind of take its own course. I don't tend to lead it, so things pop up and they disappear. And that popped up once. So I kind of like to get a movie once a day. And, it's horrifying. And it's all based on this, you know, biological warfare and the government's inane response to it. And ultimately, a lot of people are killed for no reason, and it makes the situation worse.
Yeah.
Very well done.
Oh, that sounds really fascinating.
But it doesn't make you feel good.
No.
We actually need things to make us feel good. And, you know, and the thing is, when all this comes down, we have no way to defend ourselves against the fighter jets and the tanks and all the things that will be unleashed upon us by the end of this year. Using their technology. The Tesla technology, well, there's no time for that.
Yeah.
So how do we defend ourselves against these people? Well, through basically voodoo or images, art forms, the same things that they pumped into our heads over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So one thing that I learned about these people is the fate of the Wicked Witch of the West was when Dorothy accidentally spilled water on her. And she dissolved. Now, there's one thing that this species cannot handle more than anything else, and that's the music of Johann Sebastian Bach and George Frederick Handel.
Really? Bach and Handel.
And I gave a presentation a few years back called The Power of the Ether as Related to Music and Electricity. And I had kind of a covert mind state when I put that presentation together. It was one of my best, was the weapons potential of Pythagoras. So the fighter jet and the tank is no good when the little urchin inside head blows up because of some unusual frequency.
So we just have to like learn how to broadcast
You remember
this.
the fate of the Martians in the War of the World?
Yeah.
What happened to the Martians?
Well, maybe I'm thinking.
Just when they had achieved total takeover, what happened to them? They all died.
Yeah.
They just all died. There was a little surprise waiting for them. But digital, being that it has made the cohesion of the human element disappear so that there's no more cooperation, even with something as advanced as that, if it was made to work, well, it can't get to that point because people can't cooperate. So we're basically doomed. The only thing that's going to save us right now is divine intervention or the annihilation of the human species by a cosmic, event, which would absolutely be the best. As long as it's quick and fast and nobody has time to complain, then who can? It's time to just go away because your grandchildren are going to be eating human flesh.
Yeah.
And they're going to be living in cells, like that movie The Matrix.
Yeah. I really feel like this is their actual desire for the future, just to have us immersed in simulations. That's what their little robot pet Sophia has said, that its vision of the future is to have us immersed in simulations and enslaved via neural network. And so, I mean, I think you're right that like the annihilation of the species is preferable to the enslavement of the species.
Yeah, that's the way that I'm looking at it. But Bill Gates gets his way, and he gets to inject his jizz into our bloodstream. We're finished.
Right.
There's an interesting movie made on that subject, which was kind of a corny comedy, but the ending really cinched it all up. And it's very difficult to get. It's called The President's Analyst, James Coburn. And the theme of the movie is the telephone company tries to take over the world. And why was the telephone company trying to take over the world? Was so that they could inject the telephonic instrument into you and save money on all the wiring and cabling. So they needed the cooperation of the governments of the world. Well, isn't that what Bill Gates wants?
Yeah, it's like the exact same. It's just a sort of parallel version of what's exactly going on.
So at any rate, in the long run, these people, all people, are subject to voodoo. And there are certain neighborhoods where the Negroes have not lost their abilities in these manners, in other countries, where if you screw up, things get really crazy. And that's the only defense we have. And I have no idea how to go about that. I have my own personal voodoo, but I don't engineer it. It's deadly to engineer it. But it has really played hell with the people that I've been talking about to the tune of millions of dollars of damage.
Excellent.
I don't engineer it. It just follows me around because it's the world that I live in.
Yeah.
With the music. The music and the electrical environment has caused this field that can be devastating.
It's like, in my mind, when I'm imagining this, it's like akin to the idea of a morphogenetic field. It's like you've developed like a relationship with this, whatever that is, and it with you, and so it kind of, you can act on each other's behalves or in cooperation with each other almost.
So at any rate, it's all pretty negative.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very dismal right now. It's hard to keep any sort of hope for a positive outcome alive. I do have faith, like you said, if enough humans can sort of remember their actual humanity, whatever you want to call that, whatever that is that we've sort of let go of and forgotten and detached from, and if we can sort of reconnect to it and remind each other that is something that we have the ability to do, that, and then like you said, like perhaps a celestial sort of energy would come into alignment, and maybe it all could happen at the perfect time, and who knows. I have like an undying hope for that sort of random occurrence if enough like nodes of the human network stay functional.
Well, I recommend as a starting point the music of Johann Sebastian Bach and Georg Fritz Handel.
I've got it. I've got
on
it
the
written
best
down.
sound system, on the best sound system you can get.
I love it.
That music has incredible power, but it depends. Its power is highly dependent on astronomical conditions at the moment in which you're engaged with it. So there's a lot of other factors involved, like planetary alignments and what have you. I've covered this topic rather extensively in the past. I'm kind of worn out and forgotten on it now, but this was part of my study at Sonoma State during 1978 and 1982, because all the planets lined up in 1980.
Wow.
And there was an organ concert given at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, which was a partial replica of the original European Gothic cathedrals with a 7,200 pipe, 15 horsepower pipe organ.
Wow.
And they played Bach, which is usually banned from most public performances unless it's kind of really watered down. But in this case, they played Bach at the end of the concert, right when everything was lined up. All the planets were lined up, including the moon was in the line and the whole thing. And that organ took off to the point that at the end of the concert, the organists, they had the look of absolute terror on their faces.
Wow.
And the audience was so stunned that it just sat there silent until the last 100 decibel down echo of that organ had died out, and there were no more sounds in the church, and 1,000 people instantly stood in a standing ovation. I've never seen that at a concert in my entire life.
Wow. Is there any record of this, like recording of this, that people could access? That sounds...
No, but the music itself is readily available.
Yeah. It just would be so cool to be able to be a part of that exact moment that you're describing. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was, and the whole thing was kind of like deliberate.
Yeah, who organized this?
They started a concert series of about 10 concerts, and every subharmonic of this planetary alignment, there was an organ concert.
Huh. How beautiful.
Until finally it built to this grand crescendo that it just blew everybody away and terrified the organists. The church sounded, I mean, there's no way to describe what happened. You just simply left your body.
Yeah.
The hundreds and hundreds of tons of material that church was made out of it was like it was starting to dematerialize.
So this is reminding me of this idea that these old church pipe organs and these buildings that they were in were possibly intentionally built as a type of technology in themselves, exactly for the type of purpose that you're describing. What do you think about that?
Well, that's what I get into in my presentation of the power of the ether as related to music and electricity. Is the church is a substation.
Wow.
The organ is the power transformer. The electric charge comes from the big spire. The roof is made out of copper. It is partially radioactive from solar bombardment, and the marble or limestone columns are insulators. You're sitting inside a giant electrostatic condenser.
Wow. And
There's probably enough electric charge filling the volume of that church that if somehow you concentrated it into a spark, it would kill you. And then the organ polarizes the dielectric, which is the atmosphere, and the insulators that are holding the roof up. And then you have these, cosmic lines of force from the alignment and its related solar flares permeating the situation. Well, what more of an electrical transforming device could you have than that?
Yeah. Well, and these types of buildings are all over the planet, but we're not, how did we forget that this was what we were doing, and that this is what we were capable of? Do you think that is intentional, or?
Possibly. Basically, that process started around the beginning of the 19th century. I call it 1750, the day the music died. That's when music lost its power.
Hmm.
So I would recommend a book on the subject. One is a counterfeit title, but one is the right one. It's called The Music of the Spheres.
Yeah.
And the one that's original, there's a counterfeit one that was put out by the scienticulous to make it, all material and Einstein. But the original one, the author's name is Jamie James or Jameson, or I can never get it right. But that book is what I based my presentation on.
Okay.
And it was kind of the thing was kind of like an intense flashback or transforming process, like when I first picked up Tesla's biography by J.J. O'Neill, Prodigal Genius. Changed my life forever.
Wow.
And when I got into the music of the spheres, it immediately threw me back in time to my college days when I was studying music, ancient music, and the various architectures and societies and things that existed to support that music. Is that book just hit the nail on the head, and I had to do a presentation on it.
Yeah.
It's just everything that I had learned in my college days and determined on my own observations and what have you, is here was like the theoretical basis for all of it. So I had to do a presentation on it, and that was the Power of Ether presentation.
Oh, beautiful. It makes me wonder, do you believe in past lives and that sort of thing?
I don't believe in much of anything.
Yeah.
If I'm going to stick my hand in the circuit breaker box, am I going to do it on the belief that the main switch is open, or am I going to do it on the knowledge that the main switch is open?
True. Yes, very practical. Well, I wonder...
That's why I'm still alive.
Yes. Well, I wonder what you think then about the other sorts of structures that we see around the planet, like the pyramids or other sort of megalithic structures, and whether or not these are similar to the churches with their pipe organs, in that they were an electronic sort of mechanism of some kind built very purposely for those reasons. Do you think?
Yeah, it seems to me quite obvious that that's what they were built for, and they're basically inductive devices. They draw in the lines of force, and then the lines of force are converted into something more tangible. Just like the inductive process, leads along the power lines to the receptacle in your house. It's invisible unless something gets in its way. Then it becomes very uninvisible to the point where, you could be incinerated. Then you plug in your light bulb, and all of a sudden that inductive process is converted into a tangible form of heat and light.
And do you think the range...
So it's a transformer in that it converts one type of energy, for the lack of a better word, or I should say it converts, let's just say it converts induction into energy. Energy is what you want, but it's not what flows in the wires or around them. That's induction.
Interesting.
So the Earth is immersed in a massive sea of induction. Inductive forces we don't even know anything about. We have no instruments to measure it.
And what do you think the sort of range of affect of these structures might have been, like something like the pyramids, for example? Do you think it was just localized, or do you think it was meant to be used in a much greater range?
Well, that's speculative.
Okay.
We don't really know a lot about that. There are those that believe that the pyramids were constructed with the objective of interacting with the entire inductive field of the Earth. There's theories that that's what caused the place to turn into a desert. But there's lots of theories. There's global warming, too. There's lots of theories.
True.
There's the electron theory. There's all kinds of bogus theories.
Right.
So you only can take this so far. It's
Wow.
best not to get lost in theories.
Right. To consider them, but not commit. There's so many. What?
Yeah, it's even like, a lot of the theories that I use in my writings on electricity and what have you that we've become accustomed to and are kind of established, some of them are less established. It can never be forgotten. It should never be forgotten that they're all hypotheses.
Yes, I love that.
They're useful in that, we know what diameter wire to use.
Yeah.
Or how long the insulator has to be. But that's about the extent of it. We still don't know what it is that lives in between those wires up on the pole.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of it. Even though a typical 12 kV power line feeding urban district, you have the power and the force of a locomotive fully loaded with God knows how many cars at 98% of velocity of light flying in the space between those wires to where it's going. Yet you have a flock of blackbirds sitting on those wires with impunity.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
I have no idea.
These are the things that make electricity such a fascinating subject.
Yes. Which is so
and
funny.
It's so tightly linked with life and music that makes it even more fascinating. And then you kind of get to see the triangle of power between electricity, life, and music. That there's incredible forces and powers and fields involved there that are absolutely, we have no perception of them at all.
Yeah. That is fascinating. While I was thinking of the birds, the image of the birds, my brain all of a sudden flicked onto the fact that their bones are supposedly hollow, and I wonder if that has any connection with it at all, but it just seems so weird to me that you can, if you're touching it and anything else, the electricity will flow through you and, kill you, but if you're a bird, you can have your one foot and the other foot, you'd think the electricity should flow through them and kill them. And like you said, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, it would work for anything. I mean, you could be up there, with your hands on one conductor, and your feet dangling down and what have you, and as long as you have interrupted the flow up to a certain voltage, you won't feel anything. It's like the guys that have to work on these 500,000 volt power lines. They'll drop them on them with a helicopter, and what they do is they electrically connect themselves first to the high voltage conductor, so there's no sparks when they touch it with their hands or whatever. So now they're operating with that potential.
Wow.
Yet it doesn't harm them. That's probably if you put one hang out there too long.
Yeah.
Then it might not be a good idea to be doing that on a regular basis, because a 500,000 volt power line is a much more formidable transmission system than just a 12 kV power line, which is, of course, a much more formidable system than the 110, 220 that comes into your house, which is a much more formidable system than the 12 volts that exists in your car. Now, I've watched flocks of blackbirds go through their seasonal gatherings, usually around October, where there could be 500 of them in a flock. They're all lined up, all up and down the road on those power lines. Generation after generation after generation after generation, and they're all shiny and happy and healthy. Their eggs all look normal and what have you. Back in the days, when I used to study that stuff.
Yeah.
Yet you have these wackos, that tell you that, electricity is deadly, that Rudolf Steiner crowd, that electricity is evil and we have to get rid of it. Well, blackbirds don't seem to agree.
Yeah.
Yet on the other hand, I'll be sitting in my car drinking my coffee in some fast food parking lot, and I'll be looking at the blackbirds bouncing around on the ground eating the discard of the crap that people are eating.
True.
And their beaks are all crossed, and their feet are disformed, and their feathers are all blotchy looking. And what does that tell you?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Oh, that McDonald's is good for us and electricity is bad for us, right?
Yeah. An opposite world.
But see, that's long-wave electricity. Now, short-wave electricity, like this 5G, Well, now it's a whole different subject.
Is that a lot?
Now you're in the wavelength. Once you're in the wavelength, or even worse, the wavelength is in you, well, then you're screwed. The wavelength for machine frequencies, like the power lines, is like something like 3,000 miles long.
Oh, I did not know that.
So there's no way that that wavelength can get into you or you can get into it.
Okay.
So you can stand in that space between the power lines, and as long as you don't accidentally block the flow by short-circuiting it, you don't know it's there.
Wow.
But you do that with a wavelength that's only a millimeter long, well, that thing's going right into your cells.
Yeah.
You see how this works?
Yeah.
Wavelength orientated.
And those short...
And then static electricity or magnetism, like the electric field of the Earth, those wavelengths could be hundreds of thousands or millions of miles long or have no wavelength at all. They can stretch out for infinity, and those are the things that keep us alive.
Wow. This tiny millimeter wave sort of technology, this 5G that is more likely to be destructive to our cells and affect us, it's now being, put up in the sky. Even more of our stars are being blocked now through this Starlink that Elon Musk is sort of pioneering. And what do you think about that technology of throwing it up into the sky? It's seriously very disruptive to the view. If you see it go by, it's like a line of 20 or 30 some satellites that are floating overhead and beaming this down on you.
It's hideous.
Yeah.
These people are destructively insane, and they need to be stopped.
For real.
We're at war, and no one's shooting.
The invisible enemy. It's not really invisible, though, is it? It's pretty obvious. It's just not anyone's really looking.
It's not invisible to me.
Yeah.
But that's because I live outside.
Yeah. You're much more connected than most people, which is ironic given that, some people may describe you as disconnected, at least from that sort of digital world that you're describing. But, I mean, that's exactly how you should be, to be more connected. And I wonder if you, is the reason why you spend a lot of your time and live in your car, is that to do also with the electric field there being very different from a house, or is that just a random consequence?
Well, it's just kind of that way, and I like living outside.
Yeah, I do too.
So, when I'm sitting in my car listening to the radio and I'm looking out the front window, that's television.
Yeah.
And you sit there quietly long enough, it's amazing what'll show up.
Yes. I agree.
And, I like that feeling, when the sun is going down and I'm halfway through a bottle of wine and I'm listening to some interesting signals from inside of the earth in my car, and I'm looking out the front window, and the snout of the car is pointed towards the ecliptic, and the big full moon comes up over the Inyo mountain range. Right as the sun is going down behind the Sierras behind my back, and I'm in that line. It's a really stimulating feeling.
I can imagine. That sounds amazing. I wonder, when you're listening to the earth like that, in my head, the only thing I can compare it to is like listening to a whale song. Is there any connection there? Or is that just in my head?
What was that now? I didn't quite get that.
If you're listening to the sounds of the earth when you're sitting in your car, I'm imagining you're actually listening to some sort of frequency that's coming from the earth, and in my head it sounds like whale song, and I wonder if that has any reality to it.
Some of it actually does. If you want to be blown away by what some of these sounds can build up to, is I know a person named Steve McGreevy, and he has something on the internet called Auroral Chorus.
Auroral Chorus.
He used to drive up into the auroral zone up in Canada and set his antennas up right underneath the Aurora Borealis manifestations or discharges that were occurring, and some of the sounds he got, it sounds like it's alive.
Wow.
So if you're saying whale sounds, you're damn close. That's what it sounds like.
Wow.
It sings.
Do you have recordings of these sounds anywhere on your site for people to listen to?
No, I don't have any equipment to do that with anymore. Plus, I'm more working with the inside of the Earth than the outside. But Steve McGreevy has it on his Auroral Chorus website. He's got hours of it. You can hear basically pretty much all the stuff except for the major earthquake precursor signals. He doesn't have any of those. Those are hard to get because you don't really end up with a big earthquake in your receiving area that often to be able to, just pick and choose as you like.
Yeah. So the
Auroral... But I have experienced a few of those kind of episodes when I had my facility at Landers, and it can get pretty wild.
Wow.
And just before the actual seismic event, it turns into this shrill, like a scream.
Wow.
At least that's the way it was in the Southern California area. It would scream. It was a horrifying sound.
That's fascinating.
And that was your 12-hour warning. When it got to that point, you had 12 hours before you get blasted by an earthquake about 6.5 or greater.
Wow.
In other places, it makes noises like from recordings I've heard from another person that was involved with this. At the other end of the San Andreas Fault, it sounded like these giant Tibetan gongs. And that was about 90 seconds before the earthquake.
Amazing.
And then the recent Ridgecrest earthquake, I was in my car in Oregon, deep in the forest, away from all the interference, and the one receiver that responded at that distance was, I have the AM radio in the car detuned so I can go down to the old maritime band where it's quiet now. And about 2 hours before sunset, that radio sounded like it was trying to chew its way out of the car. I've never heard such crazy sounds. It was a massive disruptive noise storm, and that was the earthquake precursor. I got a similar thing on my instruments of the big one in Japan. I got a similar sound out of my instruments in Bolinas for the earthquake that occurred in Landers, and I got the same thing again out of the AM radio in my car in Monterey County when there was a Northridge earthquake in LA. So there's a massive electrical discharge process that starts to occur up into the event and is part of the event because the electrical forces become so great they actually start pushing on the rock.
And what do you think is causing that electric disturbance in the earth that is creating earthquakes?
Well, that's a very complicated discussion there. So it appears to be a semiconductor process. I know the top researcher in this area, he works at the NASA Ames. His name is Friedemann Freude. He's written a number of papers on the subject, which, of course, were promptly rejected by the USGS. But nevertheless, he visited me, and I showed him my efforts, what have you, and he came up with a theoretical basis for part of the process of this, and at a certain level of stress, the rocks become a regenerative type of semiconductor and start producing intense electrical discharges strong enough to magnetize tools and television sets and whatever leading up to the actual seismic event, the mechanical event. And I picked these signals up, distances as great as from Japan to California. And the chart recorder went up 100%. And normally it takes a major lightning storm in the area to bring the chart recorder up to that level.
Wow.
And this thing started up right at the time of the first earthquake and persisted until the main event, and then it dampened out. And then my installation was destroyed a few weeks after that, so I lost all that data.
Oh, no. Do you think that was that destruction coincidence, or was it intentional by some force?
The destruction was a number of elements. It wasn't governmental. It wasn't men in black. Actually, the government is very supportive of my work.
Wow.
But political situations as they are, they can only intervene so much before they're at risk of, some kind of backlash. So offer protection up to the point of destruction, and then there's nothing they can do. So basically, it's not the men in black. It's either the real estate bitch involved in some kind of profiteering racket deal. That's what it was, mainly in the case of Landers. And then it's this organization called Commonweal, which is dedicated to the destruction of my work, amongst other things, which are now unfolding before our eyes. And they were also involved in that.
Wow.
They had rousted me out of my original project there, which was called the Integratron, and had taken it over and destroyed everything that I built there. And then they weren't quite satisfied that I was still around, and so they engaged in a lot of harassment, trying to create trouble for me, to start fires on my property. I'd have to deal with squatters, and they were a constant source of harassment. The telephone linemen told me they were tapping my phone lines and what have you, but they're such spiritual people.
Wow. That's what they tell
Very
themselves.
spiritual. The women in white, they're very spiritual. Lucifer,
Ah.
that's their spirit. It's Lucifer.
Oh, well, that's really...
And they want to create a new order of spirituality.
Oh, it's these people.
Doesn't it look wonderful?
Yeah, they're really, really good at making it seem really pure and wonderful and good when it's actually
yes.
not. And that's interesting. I'm glad to know that because...
Just as pure and as golden as refined poison oak oil.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to go to the...
big twig of it.
I was going to go to the Integratron, and now I'm not, so I'm glad that you told me that.
Well, there's no more Integratron.
Oh, there's not?
Well, the building's still there, but everything that was put in to make it work is gone.
Oh, okay,
No
yes.
one's allowed to do anything with it. Its electrical properties have all been pulled out of there and destroyed, and then, my related facility, about 1,000 feet up the road, that was all thoroughly destroyed.
Ugh.
I actually requested that the government destroy it. I wrote a letter to the FBI and requested the place to be milled because I didn't want it falling into anybody else's hands.
That's probably good.
So the real estate bitch didn't gain anything out of it. The government came in and annihilated the place, as far as I know. I really don't know. I just left. After that was the end of the party. And then all my friends turned on me and fucked me in the ass, and then that was the end of that. They finally sabotaged my car, and I was left destitute in Lone Pine. I had to start all over again. That's how I got on the internet, and that's how come you're talking to me.
It really is.
Took one bad thing to make something else happen. It's kind of the way it works sometimes.
That's true. Yeah, and I'm glad that it can be looked at that way, and that it can not be completely destructive and lead into other things that are productive. But it is really sad and frustrating that whatever that is, if it's part of human nature or if it's by design by certain forces or what, but that people seem to be so easily sort of turned against something that is otherwise like really good and fruitful and productive. And
well, you want to see a real saga of that whole thing that you just pointed out is the lifetimes and tribulations of Dr. Wilhelm Reich.
Ah, I've heard a touch of it. Yeah, and was he really into radionics as well?
No, he was a medical doctor that specialized in the new field of psychoanalysis. He was a student of Sigmund Freud.
Okay, yeah.
And he discovered biological ether.
And this is the orgone,
and
right?
He discovered the basic step-by-step process of creation, which just flew right in the face of evolution and germ theory and all the rest of that. And he was beaten into the grave. I don't think there's any one scientific individual that went through more harassment than Dr. Wilhelm Reich.
Yeah, and that really tells you something, like why would you try so hard to destroy something unless it was very threatening to you? And so it's interesting to note.
Well, what was most threatening was his book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism. He was a German, and that's where, the root causes of the psychosis of Stalin and Hitler were presented from his particular psychoanalytic viewpoint, and both of them put out a death warrant or death notice to put him out of business.
Wow.
And the communist infiltration was so thick at that time that there's nowhere he could go anywhere, even the United States, and get away from it without them constantly getting him in trouble. And eventually he basically, kind of went insane, and then they set him up, they got him in jail, and he died.
Jeez. Yeah, it's so sad.
So all his books were literally burned here in the United States.
Where we're supposedly about freedom of thought and communication.
Because the United States was already thoroughly infected with the communist scourge.
It's definitely
Thanks
still
to
is.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yeah, and we hold him up in our history classes and whatever as such a hero. But it was the same sort of problem reaction solution as always, that Hegelian dialectic that led people to feel like that was a good move. But if you looked at it in the overall, it was just another step in the degradation.
Yeah, it goes on and on and on. There's a massive book written on the whole puke of the 20th century by the top history professors. His name is Carroll Quigley, and he wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope. And it just lays the whole mess right out on the table. And he was really assailed for writing that book because it revealed too much. So I read the book for income. Somebody paid me $800 to read the book from front to back.
Wow.
And tell them what it meant, and wanted me to look for one paragraph, which I did. I found that I forget exactly what it was, but it was on page 866. The book is about 1,300 pages. I could read like God knows what. I can choke down if there's not a lot of mathematical equations. I could read about 400 or 500 pages a day if I put my mind to it.
Wow.
That one required a little more effort.
That one was dense even for you.
What's that now?
That one was a dense read even for you.
Oh, it's a heavy book. It's the guy, being an English humanities professor, likes to use all kinds of big words. And I got a pretty good vocabulary, but that guy really stumped me. So I had to have a dictionary there, and you had to stop and think about stuff. It wasn't easy reading.
You had to let it percolate and connect.
Yeah, you had to concentrate on things and get the connections. But I was glad that I read it. It was quite educational.
It sounds fantastic.
So I've read quite a few books.
Well, let me totally switch gears here for a second, because I really have been trying to find a time to fit it in, and it hasn't really fit in yet. But I really want to know your take on crystals and what you think they are and what they're about or what their capabilities are.
Well, there's a lot of people's ideas. I can't say one way or another.
Okay.
I can pretty much only speak from it from a geometric standpoint. It's not my specialty.
Gotcha. I just was surprised myself to learn, I'm not a specialist by any means. I'm not a scientist by any means. And I had no idea up until maybe a year or two ago, someone told me that I could actually hold two of my, just sort of random quartz crystals that I have sitting in my house, that I could kind of hold them together, and I'd find that field like a magnet has, where, it would repel and on in some areas and sort of have that connection in other areas. And it kind of blew me away, because we're not ever thought it's never brought to our attention that crystals are electric little fields. And it's just interesting to me that I don't know if it's being hidden intentionally or if it's just a random thing that maybe no one thinks is interesting, just like all the other fascinating aspects of existence, or what it is. But
well, crystals are going to have that transforming property in that they can convert induction into electricity, or vice versa.
which kind of makes sense that the Earth would have those qualities then, since a lot of the Earth itself is going to be made of crystalline structures.
Well, these are where a lot of the Earth signals come from.
Huh.
In fact, I learned when I would go deep out into the Mojave Desert, and it's a real quiet night, no wind, nothing at all, away from all human sources of audible sound. There's a geological formation that crops up around that area. They're called crystal hills, and what they are is they're like mounds of this milky kind of quartz, kind of busted up. There's no real geometry to them, like museum quality crystals are just kind of lumps of, white rock, so to speak. But
right.
is after sitting there for about an hour and letting my ears get adjusted to the silence of the neighborhood, I noticed that I started hearing the sounds that came out of the loudspeakers at the Landers facility. The loudspeakers connected to the Earth signal receiver. And I didn't have any equipment on. And then it dawned on me, those sounds were coming out of the crystal hill.
Wow.
The quartz was doing what my system did at Landers, and they were converting the electrical induction into mechanical movement, which then made sound. And it was a speaker for listening to inside the Earth.
Oh, wow.
Another thing I learned there is I probably had one of the most sensitive seismographs in existence, and sometimes in the evening when it would be quiet, I had an A-scan oscilloscope, kind of like one of those heartbeat ones, you see on the Hollywood representations, or if you've been in the hospital, one that leaves a trace, radar A-scan type scope. And it was connected to my seismic microphone. And this thing was so sensitive that you could see the ground's in motion all the time. It's like the surface of the ocean. Always waves and surges and things going on. And I would just sit there in the dark and watch all my oscilloscopes. And then I'd see something jump, and I'd hear this banging noise. And then I started to get the pattern down that the mountain range in that area called Big Bear Mountains was emitting these really low thundering sounds. And normally you don't pay attention to that stuff because you're thinking, well, it's a jet aircraft or it's a big rig or whatever, but I was pretty isolated from all that. I wasn't in a fly zone, and the highway was pretty far away, and I knew what their signals looked like on the scope. And I hear these banging noises and correlate them with the waveform on the scope, and then go outside and try to determine where, and lo and behold, these big mountains talk.
Wow.
There was a Jesuit scholar named Kirchner. He lived in the time of Kepler and Flood in the latter Renaissance era in Italy. He had himself lowered into the volcano, some big one there, famous, and so that he could listen to these sounds and identify them.
Wow.
So the Earth makes its own music. And then what I've determined with my ability to transmit into the Earth and receive back out of it, that actually the Earth can not only be used as a concert hall, but actually can be used as a musical instrument. And that's the direction that I'm going with the musical seismograph project, because it's against the law to predict earthquakes or any of that kind of stuff, and it's kind of a good thing to stay away from anyway. So why not approach the thing from the standpoint of entertainment. And then when things get wild, well, you can predict for yourself that something's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it does. It gets wild. I've heard it.
Plus, it would be such a
Both
cool thing to
electrically
listen
and,
to.
you know, and acoustically by the means that I've just described.
Oh, I love it. I can't wait. I hope that that comes about soon and that everyone gets to hear that.
It's not going to. It's a dead horse.
Oh, because
No,
of the
I can't
funding.
find anybody to cooperate. I can't get anybody to communicate. It's all come apart. It's a dead horse.
Man.
It's really too bad. You know, there's about 4 or 5 years effort has gone into this. A lot of government backup, you know, to get the facilities, to cut the red tape, get the proper protection and what have you, and lined up with the right equipment, but can't get the financial backing in this type of society. Nor can I get any of my so-called colleagues or anybody or even the public in that regard to come up with the money for this, because it's expensive. Most of the groundwork is laid. The right-of-ways, you know, the tunnels into the mountains, all the seismic probes, and miles of telephone poles and wire, and, you know, racks and racks of equipment and what have you. It got it. Next step is, you know, to get the buildings built, get the wire up on the poles, plug the whole thing in, put it on the internet. Somewhere between $250,000, $500,000, most of it, you know, in paying contractors to put in the pipes and wires and walls and stuff in the tunnel facility, which gets buried into the mountain in the mine, kind of like, you know, the old NORAD Cheyenne Mountain thing there in Colorado on a very, very small scale.
Yeah.
That's not really a lot of money in today's society. You know, there's people that snuff that up their nose in the course of a week in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But there's no money for this. No money whatsoever. No interest whatsoever. No help whatsoever. And the sources of government funding that would normally be available for this, that funding no longer exists.
Everything just being slowly
Right now there's only
degraded.
funding for one thing, and that is global warming.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only science that anybody seems to care about anymore. They don't care about the science that goes against the idea of global climate change by, you know, anthropomorphic or generated or whatever we're supposed to call it. They don't care about that science.
Well, as somebody that lives outside, I can tell you all about climate change. In fact, that was part of my study at Sonoma State, was how the ionosphere and the solar flares and the interplanetary medium interacted with the weather and the Earth's magnetic field and what have you. And when you live outside, and you're a trained biologist, such as myself, that knows, you know, what the normal stream temperatures, ocean temperatures, and what have you are, there's absolutely no justification to this global warming thing, whatever. And the Earth needs more carbon dioxide, not less.
That's what's very confusing to me.
If the level of carbon dioxide contained in the Earth's atmosphere, which I think right now is up to about 450 parts per million, that's not a lot.
No.
That's not a lot at all.
Very
And
small.
then you ask yourself, well, how can plants survive? We couldn't survive if there was only 450 parts per million of oxygen in the air. We'd be dead.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually, the plants are not really doing that good. That's why we have deserts, and, you know, the forests are dead and crappy looking a lot of times, and what have you. Is there's not enough carbon dioxide. If we drop the amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere down to about 20% of what it is now, we would lose all vegetation on the Earth.
That's what I don't
So
get.
what are these people talking about?
Yeah. Are they trying to kill the whole Earth? I mean, that's what it seems like when you put it in those terms. Like they're trying to kill everything. You know, they literally will say.
We are dealing with some very, very sick people.
Very.
And when you're dealing with a psychotic, you have to remember that the laws of reason and logic no longer apply.
Yep.
You're dealing with what you would call, in electrical engineering, a nonlinear discontinuous function.
I love that. Nonlinear discontinuous function. That's a very nice way of describing them in a way.
So it's surreal.
It is.
That's how you end up with all this quantum goofiness and the rest of this stuff. It just they become enamored to those type of relationships, and it's created kind of a religious mysticism. So now they're the high priest, you know, the whatever his name, Stephen Hawking's, and the rest of those creeps, Feynman, and all the rest of it. It's their little curly Q religion, and then it becomes kind of a socialized thing, and everybody starts to think in that particular coordinate system and dimension.
Yeah.
Until you end up with basically a completely non-functional society that can't even perform the simplest task without fucking up.
Agreed. Yeah, it seems like we're
Nothing
the least...
works anymore.
No,
Nothing works.
Nothing does, yeah. Nothing
I go
works.
buy something at the hardware store, and I bring it back, and I attempt to use it. It doesn't work.
Yep.
Somebody set me up with this internet connection, and it's all this made in China Trojan horse crap. I managed to keep enough of it out so it doesn't interfere with my other equipment. But none of the connectors mate properly. The signals go on and off, and you fool with the plug. You get it to come back on. You sit down, and as soon as you sit, and it comes back again, I'm ready to take a sledgehammer to the whole goddamn thing.
Yeah.
It's all junk. Yet I have equipment sitting in the rack here that goes back to the days of Marconi, and it still works just as good as it did back in 1913.
Yes. And that's
I have a
intentional.
1980 Toyota Corolla that looks as nice and runs as good as it did the day it was built.
Amen. I'm with you. The older things that we can find and buy and use, the better they work. I see irons. I mean, this is a silly example, but I see irons and sewing machines that are, like you're saying, they're 60, 70, 80 years old or more, and they work better than the crap that you can buy now, and they last obviously much longer, and this is planned obsolescence. And so when people try to tell me, you know, humans are destroying the planet, or, you know, we need to use less bags, I'm like, well, that's not untrue. Perhaps, like, we should treat things well and we should use less, you know, not waste things. But I think planned obsolescence has done more to create junk and trash than any other human invention. You know, or human activity.
Yeah, we call it the American waste product dream. Use it once and then throw it away.
Yes, which I
I
don't know.
remember when I was a child, we had a guy on the other side of town, had this big old wooden barn building, and he called himself Mr. Fix-It. And you'd bring your TV set, or you'd bring your fan, or your hot plate, or whatever, and this guy fixed it.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in junior high school, I used to be involved with all the TV repair stores in town. Some really didn't want me there. Others, you know, adopted me, and I actually worked on the bench with these old guys. You don't fix TVs anymore. You throw it in the dump.
Yep.
So we're told, you know, that all this new technology is going to be so clean and environmental. Well, what about all the trichloroethane and all the exotic organic chemicals and the dusts that are created and what have you to make these things? Where does all that stuff go?
Yeah.
And then it just all goes in the landfill.
Yeah.
It's just like with the automobiles. I'll have people come up and tell me, "Oh, you have such a nice car." And they go, "I used to have one." And I go, "Why don't you still have it? I have mine." They don't know what to say.
Yeah. Well, the answer is almost always ridiculous if they were to be honest, right? Because what the answer would probably be was, like, my ego was hurt when I compared myself to other people's new things, and so I decided, like, for self-value, I needed this thing or something, like something like that. It would
Yeah,
be
you have to have the socially accepted exoskeleton,
yes.
which now is the metal maggot.
Yes.
That's what these cars look like. They're metal maggots. There's one in particular, the Ford Mucus.
Yeah. What is it actually called? I can't even think of it now.
I think that came out like maybe 15 years ago. It was the first car that actually looked like a maggot. You could open up your high school biology picture book and look at the face of a maggot and look at the butt of this car, and they would be identical. The car was completely larval,
Yeah.
just like the people on the inside.
Yeah. This is the type of thing that I
Now
feel
these things all have horns and spines and snarls and sneers, and this kind of satanic, just like the moto filth that now has plagued the outdoor environment. These ATVs and the rest of this stuff, these things actually have horns.
Yeah, true.
And you go and you watch that movie Alien, where the thing gets aboard the ship,
Yeah.
and you look at its face, and you look at one of these things, and you see the exact same angles. And the creature that's driving it is the same demon in between the ears. These things are made strictly as edifices of destruction. An ATV can cause more damage to a Jeep trail than an Army tank.
Wow.
They're essence of destruction, and they're being unleashed upon the environment and us. And consequently, now we have much more vandalism to our outside facilities. Cables being cut, insulators being shot, cow troughs, bullet holes in them, deliberately torn up, spliced pedestals, ripped open, wires cut. That's America. We call it the FUSA.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
It
You
really,
get out there and your Dodge Death Trumpet and let the world know that you're going to listen to me whether you like it or not.
yes.
The original Harley Davidson credo. You will listen to my motorcycle or I'll fuck you up.
Yes.
That's the country we live in.
It's the exact attitude. And we see it in so many ways like you just described. And I get so frustrated by when cars drive by my house that are so loud. I hear them for a mile before they even came near, and miles after they were gone, I still am hearing them. And I'm like, how self-centered of you to force me to listen to your vehicle for that long in such a disturbing way. And I feel exactly the same when I'm out hiking. I can be out in the middle of, I was in Zion, like National Park. No, it wasn't even Zion, it was Bryce Canyon. Anyway, out in the middle of Utah, in this beautiful national park, and you're in nature and hiking. I'm miles out from the trailhead, and all of a sudden I hear this like pop song blasting, and this girl walks by with just her radio, dangling and blasting her song. And I'm like, how rude is that? No one here wants to hear your specific song that you're playing. If it were Bach or Handel, like you were saying, like maybe that would be the exception, but nobody wants to hear your music. But this is how self-centered and that whole kind of culture. And when you're describing that it, the car looks like a maggot and like has these horns, I'm kind of imagining how they're literally sort of infiltrating and placing that intention and negativity and destruction into each product and each sort of arena of our social world. To get that.
Yeah, it's basically a type of psychotronic warfare on the population.
Yeah.
And it started to phase in the early 80s. And it's been sequential. The arch forms have been sequential. And it's, I can't, on the air, I can't really use a lot of my terminology for it because it would really piss people off.
Yeah.
But that's what I like to do, is piss people off. But anyway, this isn't the place to do it. But it's just slime. It's just pure slime. Creepy, gooey slime. Maggots. People become slimy maggots, just crawling. They're all crawling all over each other in a big swarm to see who can get the cookie first.
Yes. It's absolutely disgusting. And people are celebrating it.
Yeah, there's no getting away from it.
No.
Like you're saying, these Dodge Death Trumpets, you can hear it a mile away. I had, in order to survive where I am right here on Main Street, I had to build a room that has 3 walls thick, packed with insulation, staggered studs, the whole thing, just like I would do if I was building a recording studio. It doesn't stop the sound from these things. It deadens it, but it doesn't stop it.
That's insane.
And everybody has a Dodge Death Trumpet. The Dodge Ram Sucker right now is the nation's favorite passenger car. It doesn't carry anything, but it has that image of gluttony and aggression.
Yes.
Something that Chrysler really knows how to get down. You know, the folds of pork fat and that kind of sucked-in chin like a gunhead has with the overbite. It's the creature
Yeah.
that drives it. It's his exoskeleton or her exoskeleton. When I see women driving these things, I mean, we're dealing with some pretty severe hormonal imbalances here.
On all sides of the equation, yeah, definitely.
And this stuff is just proliferating. And it is just laying waste to the Jeep trails. A lot of the Jeep trails that I used to live on are impassable now because these behemoths go up there and they just rip them to shreds.
Ugh.
You have to watch out when you're walking around at night. You don't fall into a trench that these things make when they get stuck in the sand or in the gravel because they'll cut a 3-foot deep ditch. I actually fell into one of these things when I was trying to take a piss at night and landed flat on my face. I didn't see it when I got out of the back of the car. Fortunately, the wheel of the car didn't fall into it when I drove into that slot.
Wow.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere. It feels like it's in every
So
aspect.
you have two freedoms of choice here if you live outside. If you vote Democrat, the national forest will be closed. You won't be allowed to live there. That's what happened to me in Los Angeles. I couldn't work there anymore because I used to live up in the mountains. I wasn't going to stay in that city at night, living on the street in my car.
No, that's
In the
dangerous.
mountains. And because I lived outside, I had low overhead, and I only charged half price. And needless to say, my customers like that because normally it's $100 an hour work, and I only needed to charge $30 because I'm a vegetarian and I live in forest.
Yeah.
Well, Obama closed it. Well, now, okay, well, you get a Republican in office. Well, the National Forest is open, but it's filled with devil trucks and ATVs.
True.
So you can't live there because these people constantly invade your camp. They have absolutely no respect. Sometimes at gunpoint. I haven't had that happen, but I've heard it on the radio.
What would be ideal and better than either Democrats or Republicans are offering us right now?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's like hard to even imagine what else could happen.
Well, the thing with Trump, you know, he is neither Democrat nor Republican. He basically is just a businessman that decided, you know, to make a joke and run for president.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, he got elected. So that's
crazy.
probably about as outside as we're going to get. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not butt buddies with Bill Gates and the rest of these creeps that are in his financial league.
Yeah, he definitely, like you said, he's like an outside chance, but that doesn't mean he's outside of the sort of structure of power. He's been
There
in there
really
for
is no way. There's no way out, other than maybe, you know, a military takeover or whatever. That's what they used to tell us in the Navy. You know, that this political thing would eventually become so outrageous that the military would have to, you know, step in and keep things operating. But you know, the military, I can tell you from experience, is not necessarily the best society you want to live in either, other than it worked good for me when I was in it.
Yeah.
But then, you know, if you're going to end up being marching around and you won't be allowed outside, it's just there's no way out.
Yeah.
It's just the problem is there's too many people and too many individuals in power, you know, that are just control freaks and derangos.
Totally devoid of any sort of connection to self or greater good or earth or whatever else might balance out their sort of psychopathy if that were possible.
Well, we're beyond all that now.
Yeah.
There is no happy ending to this story. There really isn't.
I kind of have this vision in my head of there's a part of the Neverending Story. Sorry to go there. It's actually a good book if you've never read the book, but there's a part where everything is completely dark and everything has been utterly destroyed, and all that is left is one tiny little spark, and that tiny little spark is all that's left of all of sort of like hope and creation and creativity, but it's enough to sort of restart things, and I sort of have that in my mind. whenever I go to this sort of
Well,
dark place.
biology always rules in the end.
True. I don't think nature
The laws,
in that way could
the
be
laws
killed.
of nature always rule, and eternity is eternity. The human race, if it expends itself and turns into dust, the universe could care less.
Yeah.
That dust would be useful for something else.
Yes. Yep, that's my actual my ultimate end too. Is like, this is all this all came about somehow, and it's all gonna go somewhere else eventually anyway, and we have like really no control over that perhaps. So, I'm here for this moment now.
It's ultimately kind of preordained, but
Yeah.
well, one thing is the one hope that people seem to be clinging to in all this is the situation has become so outrageous and so overt and so twisted that there could be all of a sudden a massive social backlash that would attempt to set things straight again. That's the hope. Like believing that Jesus is going to come and save your ass,
Yeah.
even though you're a complete piece of shit.
Yeah, and you've never done anything for yourself. Well, could be. Well, I like at least the tiny bit of hope, and even if you don't see that as hope, for me, it's like the continuation of things is inevitable, even if they're not the things that we see here now. And so, in the very, very grand scheme of things, everything is okay. And I like that, but I guess we should start to wind down now. I'm actually looking at my recording, and it's going to take up all of my disk space weirdly, so I'm not sure what settings I had it on, but to sort of get
Yeah,
towards...
it looks like we've been going for about 2 hours now.
Yeah, which is awesome,
Yeah.
and I thank you so much for that time. But I want you to let people know where they can go to find more of your work and access you in some ways, and if you have any sort of projects or things coming up that are in your line of sight, then let people know about those things as well.
Now, I have my website, or I should say the website that's made for me, because I really don't operate on the internet. And that's probably a good place to start. It's called ericpdollard.com.
Perfect.
And there's all kinds of YouTube stuff of talks I've given and people interviewing me, and there's loads of that. And then I think what you can get off the website is you can get my actual presentations, which they're basically a capitalistic endeavor, so you have to pay for them. But that's basically what keeps my building, keeps the doors open, so to speak. The maintenance and the utilities and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I think there's about 6 or 7 of those now. They're massive efforts. The one that I'm presently working on for this July will be 2 years. I've been working on this project for 2 years.
Wow.
The last one I did was that one was on the Colorado Springs Tesla transformer. No one has ever done that before. That's the only really quantitative data and an actual scale model operating system demonstrated to operate. That was quite an ordeal. I started in that in January and then finally launched it in the middle of July. That was 3 or 4 people involved in that effort. And then before that was, I think that one was that was the multiple coordinate system. That's kind of the Bell Telephone Laboratories mathematics of transmission and how it would apply to new forms of transmission that do not involve the speed of light. And then before that, after that was I gave a presentation on the history, theory, and practice of the electrical utility system that shows quantitatively how it's being all screwed up.
Huh.
And how to not screw it up. Then earlier on was the power of the ether, using electricity, and then there was another one on the theory of electricity called extraluminal transmission, and then there was another metaphysical one called, the ether one called the four-quadrant representation of electricity, which basically gives the American Indians credit for inventing AC.
Wow.
If you want that as kind of a wild direction.
That's awesome.
So there's enough there to probably for 3 or 4 complete college courses.
Yeah, I believe it. I'm glad that you are getting money from those, because you should get money for that much work and knowledge put into one place at one time that people can gain something from. So I think that that's great, and people can access all of those on your site. But the one that we're saying that you're working on now that's coming up, you're going to present that at a conference, correct?
Yeah, this is a once-a-year thing that I do. So it's a person named Aaron Murakami, and he's become my publisher, and he's kind of dedicated his life to collecting up all these kind of out there things, but those that relate more to actual physical stuff like health, electricity, energy, and those kind of things. So he calls it the Energy and Science Conference.
How cool.
And after I met him, then we collaborated to start doing these once a year for his conferences, these once a year presentations, which he engages in thoroughly himself. I mean, some of these things have 800 to 900 slides, and I've sat down with him for like 5 weeks straight on a daily basis to assemble these things.
Wow.
These are not just arbitrary presentations. These are in-depth with all the necessary images. I think anywhere between 400 and 1,000 slides.
Wow.
Which all have to be found and selected. And a lot of them have to be drawn by hand. Animation has to be done by hand. I do it on graph paper and what have you. So right now I'm working on one which is called the electromagnetic induction and its propagation, and that's a title that was given by Oliver Heaviside when he first quantified the electromagnetic process and gave us electrical engineering, but it was censored and he wasn't allowed to complete it, so now I'm completing it.
Good for you. That's awesome.
So it covers the Heaviside Steinmetz mathematical and dimensional process for electrical engineering, which is an extension of what's called the Faraday-Maxwell understanding of electricity, which is very fruitful and gave us our ability to create this electrical technology for better or worse.
Wow. Well, where is this Energy, Science, and Technology Conference held this year?
It's usually held in Hayden, Idaho.
Okay.
And I think you can probably find advertisements for that on my website.
Yes, that is where I saw it. And this, I'm assuming
that... Yeah, and even though the presentations you have to pay for them, there's usually like excerpts and, and people have written, what they've gotten out of it and what have you. So there's a certain amount of cost-free access, but really, it's money would be well spent getting the presentations. I think they're like $30 or $40. They're not that bad.
Yeah. No, it sounds fascinating. Like you said, it's like many college courses, I'm sure, packed into one, and so you're getting your money's worth. And I'm assuming that
now also I have a couple of relevant papers with a lot of references on this subject. So these are things you can find when you get on the internet and look up my name. Some of these papers I wrote like decades ago. It was the son of Philo Farnsworth, the inventor of television. He was a refugee in Bolinas when I was a refugee in Bolinas, and he kind of got me started in all this. After my RCA laboratory was taken away from me, all there was left was mathematics, as he pointed out. so he had me follow in his father's footsteps and got me on this. And so he had me start this paper writing thing. I used to do this like on park benches in San Francisco, and some of that's, even though I wasn't as knowledgeable as I am now, some of that material has really helped a lot of people out. And then my most recent one is called the Electrical Utility System in the Digital Age. That shows how the grid's being all screwed up, and then it has a companion paper, The Revival of the Science of Electricity in the Digital Age, which is heavily referenced, and it'll really very clearly demonstrate how we have really gone wrong with electricity and just basically have abandoned and trashed the whole concept, and there is no more science of electricity. And I'm advocating that science be brought back into being.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure your earlier papers are helpful to a lot of people, and that you're probably like far beyond most people's understanding, and so they probably have to start back there just to kind of get into what areas you've headed since then, because you have a brilliant mind, and not everyone can kind of jump to where you're at now, I'm sure. Although I imagine your presentations make it a lot easier for people to access. And so that's really
and I'm pretty
excellent.
good at describing complicated things in simple terms.
That's a good
And even if it's all mathematics and few words, it's the mathematics that you learned in high school.
Yeah. Well, that's really good for me. I'm good up to like a little bit of trigonometry, and then I start getting wonky.
Yeah, that's all you need is basic algebra, geometry, and trigonometry, and I have basically regenerated most of electrical theory without any of all that complicated Newtonian mathematics that is basically more of a rite of passage than it is really an analytical process.
Yeah.
I go back to the old days of Pythagoras. You know, if these people could build those things and know the things they did back then without Newton or Einstein, that says something. And we can't duplicate any of that today. There's not a person today that could make one of those pipe organs that they built back in the 16th century that still work today if they weren't destroyed by some stupid instigated war.
Yeah.
Nobody could build anything that works today like that. It'd be impossible.
That's so sad. I wish that we were still building those things. Well, for our last question, I was going to ask you what you would like to leave people with, as any advice you have or wisdom you want to offer, or just thoughts that you want people to ponder further, sort of your final words for people.
Well, I don't know. I think I shoveled out a good load of it already.
Yeah, you did, for sure.
What more can I say other than something really nasty?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time today. It's excellent to talk with you, and maybe we can talk again in the future. And I'm actually in Colorado Springs, so I would love to go check out. I don't know if anything is left from Tesla's time here, or your work, whatever you were doing when you were here, that I could go physically see, but that would be fascinating.
Yeah, there's really nothing left there.
I was kind of thinking that, because I've looked a little bit and tried to find something, and it's like they're not even, I don't know, you can't even find locations where he supposedly was, so I'm not sure why.
Yeah, those places, they all got developed and they're paved over now.
It's sad. But I appreciate all that you do and all of your work. And fellow travelers of the path, this is a beautiful thing. It has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to Eric P. Dollard. Eric, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Okay, likewise. You're welcome.
All right, have a good one.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye. What if your body, mind, and even soul were primarily electric? Would it change your relationship with the electronic devices surrounding you? Would it make you question further the absolute saturation point of electronic radiation in our environment? Would you spend more time balancing out the charges in your body and field by grounding and by earthing? Would you put more energy into thought into the protection of your cellular level? You are primarily electric, and until you know it, protect it, and use it with purpose in all areas of your being and life, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
It's a one-on-one lesson, so do your homework. Make
danger don't hurt. While up on earth, my bones are blessed from holy dirt. Vibes manifest for verbs and adjectives to describe birth. Worth more than one can speak. While the tongue beats a weak, a sour taste in your mouth, bittersweet. Words can also kill you when you sleep. Mind condition, low frequencies while the subconscious mind listens. I can tell a vision filled with lies disguised as truth, and spread it like the word to the youth. Watch the tube. A place where the God gets booed is sorcery. To recreate a God forgery does more than meets the eye. Not too many know. Just hear me flow like the eye of Horus Penny, yo. Yeah, not ready to leave until we believe we're free to go. You hear me, yo?
Sculpted from the ether, the material will eat ya. Stuck on this plane, lanes use jet fuel to greet ya. The dimensional 3 ain't meeting me on top of the 4th. Didn't climb Jacob's ladder to squab with a sword. Forged with ink drizzle, branched out. Try quiet your lamps now. Ascension past the matter, that they slam out they damn mouths. We ain't on land now, but they over understand. Sacrificing wisdom, hoarding dumber, kosher, wicked hands. Putting faith in worthless worship of the mortals. Artificial portals, mass ingestion of the black goo. Bioengineered morsels, conversing with machine elves. Bypassing baggage, they stuck on Android screens now. I'm scrolling emerald tablets. Moloch living lavish, off the backs of the savage. Them clasped hands at the Sabbath. Smack of energy damage, they done twisted the tongues. With nanotech in the lungs, the awakening's begun. All they really can do is fucking
run.